You know the feeling. It's April. You see the ads promising to file your taxes for free, so you click. You start entering your information. W-2, check. A little freelance work? That's an upgrade. Student loan interest? That's another tier. By the time you reach the end, that free promise has vanished, replaced by a bill for $50, maybe $100. You pay it. What choice do you have? This is why millions of Americans dread tax season. It's not just about the money we owe. It's the maddening complexity of the process itself. It's a system that feels designed to confuse you, to trip you up, and to charge you for the privilege of performing your civic duty. But here is the central paradox. The government already knows most of this information. Your employer reports your income to the IRS. Your bank reports your interest. For the vast majority of wage earners, the IRS already has the data it needs to calculate your taxes with near-perfect accuracy. So why are you forced to play this expensive guessing game every year? Why is a system that could be automatic instead a multi-billion-dollar private industry? The answer is not incompetence. It is not an accident. This entire predatory market was born from a single, consequential decision made 2 decades ago. The thesis is this. The 2002 Free File Alliance Agreement, framed as a cost-saving public-private partnership, created the system we have today. It gave for-profit companies a direct financial incentive to both lobby for a complex tax code and simultaneously sabotage the public's access to the very free filing options they promised to provide. Because of this one deal, the fox was put in charge of the henhouse. A system designed for corporate profit was enshrined in government policy, and the American taxpayer has been paying the price ever since. To understand how this happened, how a deal meant to save you money ended up costing you billions, we have to go back to the moment just before it was signed, a time when the IRS was on the verge of solving this problem for good, a time when a simple, elegant, and truly free system was not a fantasy. It was an official government plan. The story begins in the late 1990s, when the Internal Revenue Service was a national joke. It was a technologically ancient, deeply distrusted bureaucracy. To fix it, President Clinton made a strategic choice. He didn't appoint another tax lawyer or a career bureaucrat. He appointed Charles O. Rossotti, a successful tech CEO who had spent his life making complex systems work. Rossotti was an engineer at heart. His motivation wasn't politics. It was efficiency. And when he looked under the hood at the IRS, he saw a machine that was fundamentally broken. The core problem, he realized, wasn't just the agency's ancient computers. It was the entire philosophy of tax collection. Because of his private sector background, Rossotti saw the absurdity of the situation immediately. The government was spending billions to process paperwork filled out by citizens who were spending billions more to have that same paperwork prepared, all to report information the government already had. It was a colossal, redundant waste of national resources. So Rossotti and his team developed a plan for something elegantly simple, a return-free tax system. Think of it like your electric bill. The power company doesn't ask you to guess how many kilowatts you used. They use their data to calculate your bill and send it to you. Rossotti's vision was the same. The IRS would use the W-2 and 1099 data it already possessed to prepare a draft tax return for tens of millions of Americans. You'd get it in the mail, review it, and if it was correct, you'd simply sign and return it. Done. This is the path not taken. This logical, efficient, and profoundly simple idea is the ghost in our modern tax machine. And its potential for success is precisely what terrified the tax preparation industry. Because of Rossotti's plan, companies like Intuit, the maker of TurboTax, saw their entire business model facing an existential threat. Their response was not to compete, but to legislate. They launched a calculated campaign in Washington to ensure the government would never be allowed to make taxes easy. Because of Rossotti's plan, the founder of Intuit, Scott Cook, faced a catastrophic threat to his business. Cook had built an empire on a simple premise. Taxes are complicated, and people will pay for help. His software, TurboTax, was a digital guide through the labyrinth of the U.S. tax code. It was a brilliant solution to a government-created problem. But here was the problem for Cook. Rossotti's plan wasn't to simplify the labyrinth. It was to tear it down completely for most Americans. A return-free system would vaporize the core market for TurboTax overnight. Tens of millions of customers would no longer need his product. They wouldn't need any Times product. For Cook, this wasn't a debate about public policy. It was a five-alarm fire. This is why Intuit's response was so immediate and so consequential. The company made a calculated decision. Instead of preparing to compete with a free government service on quality or features, they would use their resources to ensure that service never existed in the first place. Their strategy was not innovation. It was strangulation. So Scott Cook and his team turned their attention from Silicon Valley to Washington, D.C. They launched one of the most effective and least understood lobbying campaigns in modern history. The goal was simple: kill the government's return-free filing system before it could ever take root. Their first move wasn't to fight the idea on its merits, efficiency, and simplicity. Their first move was to find allies who could help them change the entire conversation. This decision to lobby led Intuit directly into the arms of a new administration with a very specific worldview. In the early 2000s, President George W. Bush's White House was powered by a deep, philosophical belief in shrinking government and outsourcing its functions to the private sector. This wasn't just policy, it was an ideology. And Intuit's corporate goal fit that ideology like a key in a lock. The chief evangelist for this worldview was Grover Norquist, Washington's most influential anti-tax crusader. Norquist's goal, famously, was to shrink government down to a size where he could drown it in the bathtub. For him and his allies, the idea of the IRS, the most feared federal agency, expanding its power to become the nation's tax preparer, was an absolute nightmare. It was a massive expansion of government control into the lives of citizens. Because of this political climate, Intuit's lobbyists were able to perform a masterful act of political alchemy. They transformed their private, financial self-interest into a public crusade for freedom. The argument was strategically brilliant. It was no longer about protecting TurboTax's profits. It was about protecting the American taxpayer from an overreaching, all-powerful IRS. Who wants the same agency that audits you to also prepare your taxes? This reframing created the perfect political storm. It allowed Intuit to propose a solution that sounded like a patriotic compromise, a public-private partnership. Let private companies, they argued, handle the task of providing free tax filing for the public. It was a pitch that promised the best of both worlds: the efficiency of the private sector at no cost to the taxpayer. And for an administration ideologically committed to outsourcing government, it was an irresistible offer. This irresistible offer landed on the desk of two men who were perfectly positioned to make it a reality. The first was the IRS Commissioner, Charles O. Rossotti. Rossotti wasn't a career bureaucrat. He was a tech CEO brought in to modernize the beleaguered agency. He saw the partnership as an efficient, modern solution. The second, and more influential, was Mitchell Daniels, President Bush's budget director. Daniels was a fierce advocate for outsourcing, driven by the belief that private industry could almost always do a job better and cheaper than the government. For them, Intuit's proposal wasn't a Trojan horse, it was a godsend. It solved a political problem without spending government money or expanding government power. The result was a pivotal document, signed in 2002, the Memorandum of Understanding that created the Free File Alliance. It was a simple, consequential trade. The IRS formally promised it would not enter the tax preparation software and e-filing services marketplace. In exchange, the newly formed consortium of private companies would offer free, online tax prep to a majority of Americans. This is the moment the game was lost. Because of this agreement, the IRS, the one agency that already has most of your financial data, legally tied its own hands. It voluntarily gave up its right to build a simple, free system for its own citizens. This decision created a captive market, delivering millions of customers to private companies who now faced no threat of government competition. On paper, it was a public-private partnership. In practice, it was a government-enforced monopoly, and the American taxpayer was now locked in the room with a salesman. The immediate consequence of the 2002 agreement was a system that worked exactly as the tax prep companies hoped, and not at all how the public was led to believe. Companies like Intuit now had two contradictory missions. Their first mission was to uphold the letter of the deal by offering a truly free product. Their second, far more profitable mission was to violate its spirit by making sure as few people as possible could actually find and use it. This contradiction is why the modern tax filing experience is so predatory. It was designed to be To solve this problem, they turned to a new field of user experience engineering known as deceptive design or dark patterns. Think of it like a casino layout. The exits are hard to find, the path to the cashier is confusing, and every sign is engineered to keep you at the table, spending money. This wasn't a bug, it was a core feature of their business model. The goal was to lure you in with the promise of free, then guide you down a path that ended at a paywall. The tactics were strategically brilliant. They marketed a commercial TurboTax free edition, which was different from the government-mandated IRS free file program delivered by TurboTax. The commercial version would let a user input hours of information before hitting a barrier: student loan interest, freelance income, and demanding an upgrade. The truly free version was buried on a separate, obscure website. To make sure it stayed buried, Intuit added code to the website's header, telling Google and other search engines to not list the page in search results. Because of this, millions of Americans who qualified for the free service never even knew it existed. They were tricked into paying for something they were owed for free. The direct, calculated result of a deal that put corporate profit ahead of public service. This calculated deception, hiding a public good behind a maze of marketing, was a brilliant business strategy, but it had a fatal flaw. It was fragile. All it would take was one act of Congress, one simple law creating a government-run filing system, to wipe out the industry's most profitable market segment overnight. Because of this, the battle for the American taxpayer wasn't just fought on websites with confusing buttons. It was fought in the halls of Congress. To protect their carefully engineered system, Intuit and its competitors launched one of the most effective and sustained lobbying campaigns in modern American politics. Think of lobbying as a form of political insurance. Companies pay millions to professional influencers in Washington, D.C. to ensure no new laws disrupt their business model. Between 1999 and 2018, Intuit, H&R Block, and their allies spent over $90 million on lobbying. Their mission was straightforward: make sure a government-run tax filing system was politically unthinkable. This led to a powerful, two-pronged assault. The first was defensive. Any politician who dared introduce a return-free filing bill was swarmed by industry lobbyists who framed the idea as a government takeover of a private industry. The second prong was offensive. They lobbied to keep the tax code itself as complex as possible. A simple tax code is the ultimate threat to a tax prep company. The more deductions, credits, and confusing forms, the more people need their software to navigate the maze. This is why, for 2 decades, any attempt to simplify the tax filing process died in committee. It was a calculated investment that paid for itself 1,000 times over, creating a political force field that made the broken system seem like an unchangeable fact of nature. It wasn't. It was purchased. A system built on a secret can only survive as long as that secret is kept. For nearly 20 years, the tax prep industry's secret, that they were contractually obligated to provide a free service they actively sabotaged, remained hidden in plain sight. But the digital walls they built to protect it were about to come crashing down. What finally exposed this arrangement wasn't a congressional investigation or a whistleblower. It was the dogged work of investigative journalists. In 2019, reporters at the nonprofit newsroom ProPublica uncovered the technical proof of the deceptions. They found the line of code. Buried in the website for Intuit's truly free product was a command that explicitly told search engines like Google, "Do not index this page." This was the smoking gun. It proved the invisibility of the IRS free file program wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, engineered outcome. The story was an immediate bombshell. Because of this reporting, the political force field the industry had spent millions to build simply collapsed. Public outrage created political pressure that could no longer be ignored. The story gave regulators the ammunition they needed to act. The Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, sued Intuit for deceptive advertising, arguing that its promise of free filing was a bait-and-switch. This was a monumental shift. The government was now actively fighting a company it had been in a public-private partnership with for decades. The 2002 agreement, once a shield, was now a source of deep institutional embarrassment for the IRS. The cracks in the foundation had turned into a chasm, and the entire predatory system was finally exposed to the light. The exposure of the free file scam was a critical victory for transparency. But the FTC lawsuits and public outrage didn't answer the most fundamental question. 5. Why did this system persist for so long, even when it was so obviously broken? Because of the 2002 agreement, the real product Intuit and its competitors were selling wasn't tax software. They were selling a story, a carefully constructed narrative that a basic civic duty was too complicated, too dangerous, and too frightening for the average person to handle alone. This is the true conspiracy. It isn't a secret deal made in a smoke-filled room. It is the normalization of artificial complexity. The tax prep industry's most consequential achievement wasn't its software. It was its strategic transformation of taxpaying from a civic responsibility into a commercial transaction fueled by anxiety. They took a process that is simple in dozens of other developed nations and, with the government's blessing, turned it into a marketplace where they sold certainty. Every dollar spent lobbying to keep the tax code confusing was an investment. Every dollar spent on advertising that promised to find your maximum refund was a reinforcement of the core message. You can't do this yourself. The 2002 Free File Alliance wasn't just a deal to provide a service. It was a calculated move that put the fox in charge of the henhouse, giving for-profit companies a direct financial incentive to make the problem worse while selling themselves as the only solution. This is the price of complexity. It isn't just the $50 or $100 a year we pay for software. It's the erosion of our confidence in our own ability to engage with our government. And yet, after 2 decades, something is finally changing. In 2024, the IRS launched a pilot program called Direct File. It's a free, government-run tax filing system, the very thing the tax prep industry spent hundreds of millions of dollars to prevent. This isn't just a new website, it is a direct challenge to the entire narrative of manufactured complexity. It represents the government asking a simple question: what if filing taxes wasn't a product you have to buy, but a service your government provides? The battle over Direct File's future is the next chapter in this story, a direct confrontation with the legacy of the 2002 agreement. If you found this eye-opening, hit subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden causes, and leave a comment. Do you think the government should offer its own free tax filing service?